Hi everyone, this is Chapter 2, the Counselor, Person, and Professional Part 2 for Counseling 4500. All right, the counselor's values in the therapeutic process, the role of the values in counseling. So this is something that we want to start to address about who you are as a person and then how your values can affect your client. All right, so the roles of the values in counseling. Values are our core beliefs that influence how we act, both in our personal and our professional lives. Personal values influence how we view counseling and the manner in which we interact with our clients. Guard against the tendency to use our power to influence a client to accept our values. So that word right there, or that kind of like idea, that concept right there, is value imposition. What that means is, let's say for you, you think that everyone needs to go to college, right? No one else should actually go get a job after they graduate from high school. They need to get a job. So if you think that really strongly, and then let's say you have a client who's thinking about just going to get a job after high school and they have no interest whatsoever to go to college, if you do not respect that and you're like, oh, don't you think you want to go to college? And you kind of are pushing them about those things, that's kind of like you in putting in your own values to this client, which is really unfair because those are your values, right? Your value system that you can have with yourself or maybe with your own family members or your loved ones, but not necessarily with your client because your client is not you, right? And you're basically saying is the only way to be happy is to do it the way that I believe in it, right? So that's something that we want you to start to think about and realize, what, not everyone in the world shares how what happiness or what success means the way that we do ourselves. And that's something that's very humbling for some of us to not realize until today. Your role is to provide a safe and inviting context in which your client can explore their congruence. Congruence is a vocabulary word right there. What it means is equal to or the same as. So when we say, oh, I believe you can do it, I hope that inside you feel that way. So when you say it outside, that you mean the same thing, right? However, some of our clients are very frustrated, and that's the reason why they're coming to therapy. So on a typical day, let's say at work or whatever, people might go, oh, hey, how are you doing? Right? And then they'll say, oh, I'm fine. But really, they're not fine. So they're not being congruent with themselves, right? But that's kind of like everyday thing where you don't want to tell everyone your problems, which makes sense. So in a counseling setting, we're hoping that you create a safe space for your client so they can bring that frustration that's inside outside so they can start working on it. If your client acknowledges that how they are thinking and behaving are not getting them the things that they want, then you will assist them in developing new ways to think and behave to get them closer to reaching their goals. And that means learning about different theoretical frameworks and their techniques that will hopefully help them reach their goals. Value imposition, which we talked about earlier, counselors directly attempting to define a client's values, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors, actively or passively. So remember when we were talking about before about college, right? So you're like, oh, don't you think you need to go to college? Or, what the outlook looks like, college would be better for you, right? We actually don't know. And some jobs don't require an education. And they're very wealthy and they're really happy with their job. So by influencing them either actively or passively is considered an issue, an ethical issue. And that's something we hope that you do not do. Different than when you're implementing a philosophy of counseling. So that one is a little bit different because we're talking about just an overall theoretical framework and how we can apply it to that person's life, right? So we're not necessarily forcing them to believe what we believe in. That's more just about hey, let's try out this person's philosophy that might match kind of to yours. And maybe we can then help you reach your goals. Okay, the role of values in developing therapeutic goals, the client's responsibility to decide upon goals and collaborating with a therapist. So whenever I have a client, I will always say, hey, welcome to, counseling. This is the first day. Is there a reason why you came to therapy? What are your goals that you want? And then from there, as we talk about it, we'll probably figure out exactly what they want out of, the 15 weeks or so of counseling sessions that we're going to have. General goals of counselors must be congruent with the personal goals of the client. So this, what that is saying is, we hope that the therapist or the professional helper believes that your client can actually get those goals and achieve those goals. We hope so. We're not hoping, we don't want you to go, oh yeah, you can do it. And then in your head, you're like, you're totally not going to do it, right? Because if that's really, then you're going to kind of set them up for failure potentially. So you need to figure out a way where you can then, believe in them and have honest, authentic, genuine, faith in them achieving their goals. Both clients and counselors need to explore whether they can work together. Sometimes people say it's kind of like dating when you meet up with a therapist, where you need to make sure that you two match up, right? You need to get along with each other. Sometimes I'll hear clients talk about how, like, oh, I don't know, this person's really weird. My therapist is really weird. But maybe it might not actually be the right match. Counselors need to understand, respect, and work within the framework of the client's world rather than forcing the client to fit into the therapist's scheme of values. So again, very similar to what we're talking about with value imposition. We want to make sure that the therapist and the client match up when it comes to their values. So here are some questions we might ask. Why are you here? What do you expect from counseling? What do you want? What do you hope you will leave with? How is what you are currently doing working for you? And what aspects of yourself or your life situation would you most like to change? Obviously, you're not going to ask all these questions. You might pick one or two of these questions to start that conversation so that you can both understand what's going on. All right, becoming an effective multicultural counselor. Recognize diversity issues and shaping one's counseling practice to fit that client's worldview. So again, we talked about the fact that we're living in a very metropolitan city, but also with technology and everything, our world is pretty global now. Our lives are pretty global. Have you ever ordered anything directly, let's say, from China? You have, right? Probably. Most of you have. So already right there, we're no longer shopping in our neighborhood. We're shopping on Amazon. We're shopping on, let's say, Temu or whatever. And those things means that you're no longer being within your community, but actually beyond your community, which means that there's going to be a lot more diversity coming from your interactions. Ethical obligations to develop sensitivity to cultural differences. As a professional in this helping field, we recognize that you are going to meet people who are different than you. So we expect you to start learning about differences and, diversity and celebrate it within your program, but also afterwards as well. After you graduate and everything like that, you should keep on learning. This allows a counselor to develop interventions that are consistent with the values of your client. Again, so another thing that's really interesting is that, hey, maybe your client believes in ABC values. And so you need to respect those. And maybe one of those values is working with, let's say, a healer in their community. That means maybe potentially reaching out to that healer and talking to them and working together to help your client resolve their problems. All right, culture, the values and behaviors shared by a group of individuals. So that could be age, culture. We hear a lot of people talking about Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, and stuff like that. Those are different age cultures, basically. There's also gender, religion, sexual orientation, physical and mental abilities, and then socioeconomic status. So these are different things that people, if they share these things, probably experience very similar things, right? So they have a culture, and that's what they're talking about right here. Okay, acquiring competencies in multicultural counseling. Understand the cultural origins of any values, biases, and attitudes held. So as a child, you were born and raised to see the world in a specific way, and typically it is probably a combination between your both of your parents, right, and maybe your grandparents as well, and then maybe also your community as well. So because when we're young and we don't know a lot, we really do trust and believe everything that they say. Now think about you as an adult now. Do you think that everything that they said was correct? Probably not, right? However, when we were growing up, we really did believe a lot of things that they told us. And most of it may be actually correct, right? But what we need to realize is that sometimes some of the things that we learn were not correct. And then we need to recognize and then go, wait a minute, actually, that's a bias that I grew up having. And that's not actually true. Sometimes we have to tell ourselves these things. Okay, it requires work to actively monitor our biases, like I just said, attitudes and values so that they do not interfere with working with other people. Multicultural framework says number 1, we want to focus on the beliefs and attitudes. 2 is the knowledge, and 3 is the skills. So we're going to go into these in the next couple of slides. All right, beliefs and attitudes. Aware of their positive and negative emotional reactions towards persons from other racial and ethnic groups. So are there feelings that you have when you are around other people that are different than you when it comes to, let's say, racial or ethnic groups? Seek to understand the world from the vantage point of your client. So if your client is from a specific ethnicity, are you able to kind of like understand why they're making the decisions that they're making? Is it something that's influenced by their world, their culture, their place of origin? Okay, do not believe their own cultural heritage is superior. I hope that you do not think that you are always better than your client, okay? We're all different in different ways, so that makes us all unique, right? So we do not want you to think that you are better than another group of people. Not all theories and techniques will be appropriate for all clients, and that's something that you'll learn as we go through the different therapeutic frameworks, is that not all of them are going to work well for every problem that exists in this world. All right, when it comes to knowledge, know about their own racial and cultural heritage and how it affects them personally and professionally. And that sounds a little funny, but actually there are a lot of people who don't really know a lot about their own culture. Some of us are very acculturated to Western society. Some of us have assimilated because of maybe being forced to assimilate generations before. When we think about Native Americans, they were put into boarding schools and then made to look more European, right? And then remove themselves from like Native American culture. So some of it is being forced, some of it voluntarily. It really does depend on each person, but that's something that we also want to think about as well. All right, understand the dynamics of oppression, racism, discrimination, and stereotyping. Intersectionality and privilege are part of that. So when it comes to that, we need to understand why some cultures are not necessarily treated as fairly as other people, right? When it comes to oppression or racism, discrimination, sometimes certain groups of people don't really get the same opportunities for work, or maybe a loan at the bank, or something like that, right? So we need to start to understand why our world is like that, or our country is like that, and why one of your clients might come in being very upset about the world because, let's say, they're trying to get a job but they just can't, or they can't get high-paying jobs. Let's talk about those things. Like, what's going on? Maybe it's not really them. They really do have a right to be angry. Let's talk about the system or the society that we live in instead. All right, know about minority family structures, hierarchies, values, and beliefs. So in some cultures that are very collectivist, grandparents might be the ones who make a lot of decisions. Maybe the parents do as well, and then the children do not. They follow the directions from the hierarchy. Culturally competent counselors know how to help clients make use of indigenous support systems. I talked about that briefly before. Let's say that if you have a client that has, let's say, a medicinal healer or a shaman, you might want to work with that person to work with them and the client so that, the client can achieve those goals and is still respectful of their own culture and identity. Skills and intervention strategies. Know how to educate their clients about the therapeutic process, such as goal setting or setting goals, appropriate expectations, legal rights, and the counselor's orientation. So you'll also learn about this, I think, in case management, where we talk about the fact that before therapy even starts, that we talk to our clients and let them know exactly what they're going to do in therapy, because sometimes they don't even know what they're doing. Or what to expect anyways. So you're going to say, we're going to work on certain goals that you bring up. It might work. It might not work. We don't know. We cannot promise you anything because we don't know how life is going to turn out for all of us, right? But also the legal rights. They have the right to quit whenever they want to. Let's say that if they have to pay you, that's a legal issue, right? To pay you for your services. And then also your counselor's orientation, which is basically your therapeutic framework. How do you see the world? Maybe your clients will appreciate hearing from your perspective. And then they might identify with, or maybe they might say, you know what, maybe this is not the right match. All right, multicultural counselors may modify and adapt their interventions to accommodate cultural differences. A lot of the therapies that you're going to hear are all created kind of by Western people. But what has also happened since then is that we try to put a multicultural lens on all of this and see how does it work when it comes to other people that are not, let's say, Anglo or European. Willing to seek out educational, consultative, and training experiences to enhance our abilities. So as you graduate from this program, you're probably going to start to join organizations. You're going to probably get certain types of licensures or certifications. Those are things that we expect that you as a professional will do for the rest of your life. In cases of people who have lived in more than one culture, the access of the degree of acculturation and identity development is really important to understand. We need to know. Think about 3 generations. Maybe the grandparents don't even speak English. Maybe the parents sometimes speak English at the workplace, but does not speak English at the home. And then maybe the child only speaks English, right? So we need to know what their value system is, what is, their areas of saying yes or no, their boundaries and stuff like that. It may be traditional, but find new cultures appealing. That's how some people will probably see it, probably younger generations. Conflict occurs when trying to integrate 2 cultures. Sometimes it's really going to be really hard to be able to manage both cultures, the dominant culture, which is America, with your own place of origin. It will be frustrating, and it can cause an identity crisis. Family will have different rates of acculturation, which can also cause conflict as well. Like we said before, maybe the value system, let's say a teenager wants to date at 15, but the grandparents like, no, you're not, so that's something that's going to potentially cause some problems as well. All right, issues faced by beginning therapists. Dealing with your anxiety. A certain level of anxiety shows that you are aware of the uncertainties of the future. Self-doubt is normal. More important is how you deal with it. And here's something that I will tell from my own personal experience, which is sometimes your clients will not want to work with you, right? And your feelings are going to be hurt. And then you get upset. This is all your ego, or basically, your pride, right? It got a little hurt. So it's something that we need to start to deal with and learn how to live with and go, you know what? Sometimes there are successes, sometimes there are failures. What do we learn from this, right? What are the possible reasons why this client said no to you? And it's not always necessarily bad. It might not even be personal. They're like, you know what? I just don't want to talk to anyone else besides, let's say, a professional therapist, and it's not you, right? That's how it is. Okay, being yourself and self-disclosure. New beginners may focus on the book too much and lose their own selves. So some of you all will look at the book and study really hard, but then you don't have that personality component, and you need to start to integrate both of them together. When you are yourself, you're more likely to be authentic, and that's how you connect with other people. Some may become too professional, and then people might not feel like they can communicate with you or connect with you. Some will also have too much self-disclosure. Sometimes you end up talking too much about yourself, and that's not necessarily good because the client is paying for your time to listen to their problems. But suddenly you're telling them about your problems. Suddenly the client's like, am I your therapist? And that's not necessarily a good thing. All right, avoiding perfectionism. We burden ourselves with the belief that we can never make mistakes. You will make mistakes. You will always make mistakes. It's okay. Whenever you recognize that there's a mistake, you want to resolve it quickly as possible and then move on. Being honest about your limitations. You will not succeed with every client. That is very true. Know when and how to make a referral. So in case management class as well, you will learn that there's paperwork where you can transfer your client to another person if it's within the same agency, or maybe even just give them a list of resources where they can go somewhere else if they don't like our agency. Differences between your realistic limit and challenging what you think are your limits. Be really aware of who you are as a person and what your value system is, and also what your abilities are when it comes to helping other people.